Act I, Silence Under the Sea. Chapter 1, Exercise Day. The Barents Sea on a summer morning was unlike any other. It was calm, vast, but there was a heavy echo in the cold wind, as if the ocean were keeping a secret in its heart that it did not want to reveal. The mist was white, thinning and thickening on the horizon, where the gray water mixed with leaden clouds. In that mist, the giant steel block called K-141 Kursk crept along, silent as a steel ghost. Inside the ship, the warmth of human breath and the smell of burning oil mixed together, making the air both heavy and dense. The corridors were long and narrow, the pipes were crisscrossed. Each step of boots on the steel echoed like the beat of a giant heart. Mikhail Averin sat at the sonar table, his ear pressed to the headset. He listened patiently, like a hunter in the night forest. The waveform on the blue screen trembled, each blinking like a whisper from the sea. Mikhail took notes in his notebook, his handwriting neat and tidy. On the corner of the table, a small photo of his wife and daughter was pressed into clear plastic. He glanced at it, then continued to tilt his head, his ear still pressed to the silence of the ocean. The steel door opened. Arkhipov, the commander of Compartment 9, entered. He was a man who had spent many years at sea, broad-shouldered, his eyes hard but tired. He looked at the sonar screen and then glanced at Mikhail. "A calm day to sail," he said softly. Mikhail smiled slightly, his voice low, and quiet to listen. In the dining room, several sailors were sipping hot soup, the steam rising from the glass. The sound of spoons tapping against the bowls was dry. Kolya Sidorov, the ship's youngest sailor, pulled an old silver pocket watch from his pocket. He held it up, half joking, half serious. "My grandfather said this watch would stop if something bad happened." The table laughed. Someone teased. "Then you should have left it at home." Laughter filled the cabin, softening the cold. But Kolya still clutched his watch, his eyes filled with an indescribable worry. In the torpedo bay, Viktor Petrov, the armament engineer, inspected every weld, every lock. Moisture clung to the metal, and the steel was cold. When he reached the A-250 torpedo, he stopped and flipped through the maintenance book. The ink was smeared. He touched it, as if searching for a curse that had been written long ago. "Please don't betray us today," he whispered, like a prayer to the lifeless mass of steel. Evening fell. Kursk rose above the sea, massive and majestic like a black fortress. The drill whistle blared far away, rumbling like the trumpet of the god of war. The water shook. Inside the control cabin, officers strained their eyes to watch the countdown. The loudspeaker announced, "Prepare for simulated firing. Torpedo number 1, ready." Everyone's heart stopped. 3, 2, 1, a smack. A loud, dry, unnatural sound, unlike any shot they had ever heard. Flashing lights, all eyes froze. Chapter 2. The explosion white smoke billowed from the corridor. A pungent smell rose. Sailors coughed and screamed. Arkhipov roared, ordering, "Close the hatch." The heavy steel door slammed down with a crash like a slash. Mikhail pulled Kolya through the narrow gap. Kolya gasped. "What was that?" Mikhail answered shortly, "It wasn't a shooting range." Then the sea shook. From the heart of Kursk, a second explosion rang out. Deep, long, terrible. Boom-a-boom. The hull shook, twisted, as if the ocean were trying to crush it. The lights went out. Darkness. In Hold 9, the red emergency lights flickered, illuminating pale faces. 23 people were huddled together, sweat mixed with salt, smoke, and dust. Water began to seep through the welds, dripping like knives hitting the heart. Arkhipov growled, "Count the men! Seal the valves! Where is the backup power?" Everyone was running around, flashlights shaking, illuminating the faint smoke. Mikhail pressed his ear to the thick steel plate. In the oppressive silence, he heard a strange sound, the groan of metal. Not machinery, not water, but like a long wail, echoing from the bowels of the ship into his chest. Chapter 3. Silence on the shore. In the small apartment in the port city, Irina Averina was hanging laundry. The radio was turned down low, the announcer's voice steady. "The Russian Navy is conducting routine exercises. Conditions are good." She paused, staring at the landline. It was silent, not a single ring. Outside the window, the city was strangely quiet. At the naval base, families gathered in groups. They whispered, their eyes anxious. A few children held their mother's hands and asked hesitantly, "When will Daddy be back?" No one answered. Anna Kuznetsova, a local reporter, stood in the middle of the crowd, camera around her neck, notebook in hand. She wrote, "This silence is heavier than the wind." In the emergency meeting room, a map was spread out on the table. Colonel General Lavrov pointed to the last point where communication was lost. "All backup channels?" the officer replied. No response, sir. A file with the red stamp, International Assistance, was placed on the table. Lavrov looked at it for a long time, then pushed it aside. We will do it ourselves first, he said. His voice was cold as steel, but his hands were shaking slightly. Chapter 4. Morse in Steel. In Hold 9, the humidity was heavy and cold. Arkhipov divided the rations. Some water, a few batteries, a spare oxygen tank. We are one lung. Breathe slowly, breathe evenly. Everyone nodded. A soft tapping sound rang out. Tick, 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 from somewhere outside the hull. The whole hold froze. Eyes lit up. Someone can hear me, Arkhipov shouted. They rushed out, took wrenches and hammers, and tapped the steel. The echoes rang out, echoing out to sea like submerged church bells. On the surface, sailors on the rescue boat put on their headphones. More signal! There are survivors! They shouted. But the wind and waves had begun to rise, swallowing the echoes. Mikhail opened a small notebook, his hand trembling as he wrote. Irina, if you can read, I can still hear the sound of the sea, but I can no longer hear you. In the hold, everyone listened to their own echoes, their hope as fragile as a small flashlight in the endless darkness. Act 2, Pressure and Time. Chapter 5, The First Attempt. The next morning, the sea was choppy. Columns of gray mist and rain rolled across the water like soft walls. From the side of the rescue ship, the winch whistled. The commander's voice mingled with the wind, hands clenched in cold, wet gloves. Oleg Kuznetsov, the chief diver, crouched under the canopy, his hand rubbing the surface of his lifeguard's hood like someone stroking a horse's forehead before entering the racetrack. Inside his mask, his breath fogged up and melted. He checked the connections, the thick black rubber gasket, the millimeter-sized joints one last time. Someone asked, "Is it cold?" He nodded. The cold was more than just temperature. It was the sea's way of reminding him that every mistake was paid for by someone else's time. The water opened up, black and thick. As Kuznetsov backed over the edge of the deck, the hands lifted him up as if in answer, then let go. The sea closed over his head. Underwater, the world was dark blue, silent and heavy. Small bubbles rose like prayer beads. Below lay the black mass of Kursk, lying askew, its belly like a giant sleeping whale. Black burn marks and cracked welds revealed sad, sharp edges on the steel hull. Kuznetsov approached the escape hatch. The gasket of the right cowl fit exactly against the flange, like two lips that had to find each other in a trembling. He signaled the winch to lower it a little further. The occasional crackle of sea sand against the steel. He felt the pressure pushing the cowl back. Left 2, down 3, stop. His voice traveled through the radio as through a cold, sandy cemetery. On deck, the men bent over, staring at the screen. Lavrov gripped the rail, his knuckles white. There was a collective pause in breathing as the cowl touched the flange ring and then missed. The eddy rushed in, pulling the hood off, as if someone below had gently pushed his hand away, saying, "Not yet." Kuznetsov was thrown, shaking, his legs kicking hard to keep his position. "No match," he said, each word broken. "I repeat, no match." On deck, the curses fell to the floor like rivets. In compartment 9, the sound echoed with a dry click, like someone tapping a coffin lid with a fingernail. Everyone jerked their heads up. Arkhipov raised his hand. "Ready? If the door opens," but it didn't open. The excitement fell to the steel floor like a broken glass that no one bent down to pick up. Kolya clutched his watch in his hand. Mikhail put his hand on his shoulder, squeezed gently. "They're up there," Kolya whispered. "And we're here," Mikhail replied, "until one of us gets tired." The whole compartment chuckled. The wit was as small as a piece of hard candy in a winter pocket, not enough to warm you, but enough to remind you that you still have a tongue. When Kuznetsov surfaced, taking off his cap, his hair dripping with water, he looked straight at the sea, a level look between two people who understand each other and yet still argue. "A few millimeters off," he said, as if talking about an unseen wound. Again, the wind increased, the summer rain thickened. On the shore, the phone still did not ring. Chapter 6, System and Silence. In the base conference room, the white neon lights made all the faces look bluer. The files grew thicker, as if the paper could withstand the seawater. Lavrov stood before the map, the red arrows converging on a small black dot. Around him, words collided. Technology collided with pride. Time collided with something called procedure. "Norway and England have better-fitting hoods," said one officer, his voice as careful as if walking on ice. "They suggested sending ships." "We are not beggars," replied another, quick and sharp as a new knife. "We need time," said a third. "There is no spare time down there." Lavrov was silent. He looked out the window at the sea. He had been a sailor. The sea was the birthplace and burial place of men like him. But between him and the sea now stood a wall of plans, reports, responsibilities. The fear of losing an invisible contest, with eyes watching from all over the world. "We'll do it ourselves," he said again, as if to reassure himself. Viktor Petrov sat in the equipment room, in front of the torpedo diagram projected on the screen. Pipes, safety valves, oxygen chambers, numbers and letters turned into gray fish swimming back and forth in his head. He thought of a blurred line, a hasty signature. He put his hand to his forehead, closed his eyes. There was a silence like a lid on a boiling pot, smooth on the outside, bubbles bursting inside. "What if keeps you up at night?" A woman's voice startled Petrov. Anna stood in the doorway, a tape recorder in her hand. She had wandered in through a corridor and been stopped twice, like a cat trying to find its way into a fish room. "You're not supposed to be here," Petrov said, but his voice was without fire. "I heard the family outside," Anna replied, pointing toward the yard. "They said their child was knocking." "What did you hear?" "Steel remembers better than men," he said, like a blacksmith's proverb. But steel does not speak. In the yard of the base, Irina waited in line for another meaningless piece of paper. Her daughter asked to be held. Her arms were tired, as if someone had drained the blood. Another wife stood nearby, whispering, "I dreamed the door was open. He was standing there, soaking wet. I felt his skin as cold as an enamel basin in the kitchen." Irina nodded, as if nodding to a sad and beautiful fairy tale, told to adults. On the surface of the sea, the second attempt began. The hood lowered more slowly, more carefully. Numbers passed over the radio like a doctor's count before he put a scalpel into the skin. Kuznetsov whispered each step. "Lock the washers, adjust, reduce the vortex." Hands tightened on the ropes. The whole ship's gaze was focused on the meeting of rubber and steel. A gust of wind whipped. The rescue ship shook. The hood hit missed by a line. A hair's breadth was off. The sound of heavy breathing on the radio. "3 more. No, stop. Turn right." A package accidentally slipped off the rope, fell against the Kursk hull. The clang echoed in compartment 9 like a broken promise. Hope had a shape. It was like a thin rope someone dropped into a deep well, and each time it missed, the rope rubbed against the wall, fraying a little more. Chapter 7. In the darkness, night fell early in the Barents Sea, as was their habit. In compartment 9, they learned to arrange the darkness. People lay close together to keep warm. Every word had to go through 2 filters. Was it necessary? Was it a waste of oxygen? Silence suddenly became a new virtue. Arkhipov divided the schedule: who tapped Morse, who watched for leaks, who sat near the valve in case. A young soldier coughed. He handed him an emergency oxygen mask, but he shook his head, looking at the man on his left, who was breathing harder. He didn't argue. He just made a mental note of his name, like a debt. "The duckling walked across the ice," Mikhail said quietly, not looking at anyone. His voice even as if he were reading from a storybook at the head of the bed. His mother said, "When you count to 100, the sun will come." Some people chuckled. Kolya tapped the steel shell with his fingernails, each time releasing a small ray of warmth. The cold crept in through the smallest cracks. It was like a patient gray cat, finding a soft spot on the back and curling up there. Every time someone sighed, the steam rose into a thin mist. They began to tell fragments of life stories. A girl with red hair selling flowers at the train station. A dog that found its way home. A summer on a small river full of fish. The stories made the room feel larger by opening imaginary windows. "Right," Mikhail said to Kolya, handing him a pencil stub and a piece of paper wrapped in plastic. "Write to your mother. Just 1 sentence will do." "I don't know what to write," Kolya said, his eyes following the hands of his pocket watch. "Write, 'Don't wait for dinner.'" Kolya laughed. His face grew younger. He wrote, his handwriting slanting like a small boat in the wind. The oxygen needle dropped a notch. Everyone watched as if they were looking at a fallen yellow leaf in a closed room. Everyone knew there was no wind to blow it up. Mikhail pulled out his own notebook. The flashlight of the person next to him slid across his writing, like a wave licking the sand. "Irina, if you read this, I want you to know that I thought about you more than I ever said. I thought about your hair. Wet after washing, you smiling, the water dripping, and Thuy fall asleep between us like a warm stone. Here, the stone is cold." He stopped writing, listening. The Morse code of the person near the door faded and evened out, like a heartbeat after a run. On deck, Anna wrote the article by hand because the computer couldn't stand the salt wind. There are sounds only heard in bones: the groan of steel, the breathing of water, the sound of people waiting. She knew the article would probably be blocked, cut, softened, but at least she had named the silence. Chapter 8. belated hope. A depression from the north crawled down like a blind beast. On the surface of the sea, waves were beginning to have white manes. Lavrov sat alone with the international assistance file open like an old wound. He picked up the pen, put it down, picked it up again. "If I sign," he whispered, "it means we're late." He signed. The news came faster than the wind. There would be a foreign rescue team. They were wearing hoods that would fit into the Kursk's flange like a key to a lock. But the wind came too. The sea pushed the boat like a toy with strings. In compartment 9, a soldier fainted. They gave him air by pressing his nose and mouth together, as in the old days when people fanned the fire in a stove. He opened his eyes and saw a face very close, a human breath mixed with the smell of salt and metal. "Thank you," he managed to say, then closed his eyes again. Arkhipov went around to each of them, touching their shoulders, as if stroking the head of a feverish child. "We'll hear the lock," he said, his voice steady and slow. "If not now, then in an hour. If not in an hour, then tomorrow." The lock is unmistakable. He spoke as if to the steel itself. Mikhail wrote the longest letter. Short sentences followed one another, like small steps in the snow to keep from sinking. "Don't argue with your mother anymore. Mothers age quickly, and anger is a heavy coat. If possible, go to sea not to understand me, but to understand the wind. The wind lulls people into silence. I remember the sweater that smelled of cheap soap. Keep it. Don't wash it yet." He folded it, stuffed it in nylon, tied it to a small piece of string, and taped it neatly inside the tube. The little thing was almost useless, but it made him feel lighter, like dropping a stone from a pocket when climbing a hill. That night, the wind howled through the mooring lines like a man howling at the top of a mountain. On the deck of the rescue ship, Kuznetsov stood looking at the dot of light of an approaching Western ship. No one spoke. They understood the same thing. Promises can travel very fast on a map, but waves don't read maps. At the base, they posted the update list on the board. Irina interrupted. The words were the same. In every line, the same rhythm. Efforts are continuing. Weather conditions are unfavorable. She realized that no could be the shortest way to describe a long stretch of emptiness. Chapter 9. The Second Silence. The morning the foreign fleet landed, the sea was heavy as a man who had been awake all night. Low clouds swirled around the mast. The new hood was larger, the frame stronger, the gasket like a wide lip. This time, everyone whispered, like a dizzying chorus. Kuznetsov and a Norwegian diver looked at each other, a quick nod like a mutual oath with their eyes. They descended. The ropes were taut. Underwater, everything slowed down, time heavier, the heartbeat louder. When the hood touched, everything seemed to stop, an absolute silence within a greater silence. In compartment 9, they heard something, not a thump. Another, thicker vibration, like a rainy night about to flood the porch. Arkhipov signaled, "Ready." Mikhail took Kolya's hand. The hands of his watch were moving, still moving, like an ant trying to carry a piece of sugar bigger than itself. Above, the wind suddenly changed direction. A few millimeters became an abyss. The hood shifted a little, just enough to not be right. Someone shouted into the radio. "Hold," Kuznetsov said, his voice calm to the point of cruelty. But the sea did not hold. The sea never holds when you beg. Hope does not die with a loud noise. It slowly died out, like an oil lamp. Before it went out, it flared up a little, making the shadow on the wall waver, making you think someone was about to enter. Then it subsided, leaving a faint burning smell. The Morse code in compartment 9 thinned out. The typist, tired of tapping, passed it on to another. They took turns like holding a crying child. Someone's eyes were closed longer than usual. Arkhipov shook them. The other opened them, smiled, and whispered, "Sleep a little." Mikhail wrote the last line of the letter. "The sea keeps what it wants to keep. My part is this." Kolya sat close to the wall, put the watch to his ear. He listened to the ticking as if listening to his heart. Just as a small but deep pain ran through his chest, maybe from lack of oxygen, maybe from sadness, the second hand stopped. 11:28. He laughed. "Grandpa was right," he whispered. Mikhail held his hand tighter. "Then I'll go ask Grandpa again," he said. For the first time, his joke didn't elicit any laughter but a thin gasp. On the sea, Lavrov stood alone at the stern, looking at the dark water. He thought of the children in the base yard, of woolen hats pulled down over their ears, of gloves with many holes. He thought of the word late. It was short and sharp, like a piece of glass falling on a shoe. As the foreigners stepped onto the deck, one of them took off his mask, his eyes red with salt water and something else. He said something in a language no one could understand. Maybe sorry, maybe no. Those two words, in any language, sound the same when spoken on the wind. In cabin 9, the tapping stopped. Not because they had given up. Simply because, at some depth in the lungs, there was nothing left to send. The second silence began like that. Not with a decision, but with an absence. On shore, the telephones were still silent, but now the silence had a weight. It was no longer a pause between two sentences. It was a complete sentence. Mikhail closed the notebook. He put it beside him. Outside, the water tapped against the hull as lightly as rain. He thought of Irina, who sometimes forgot to turn off the kitchen light, and of the sound of water falling into the steel sink like a broken note. He thought that if there was any music to accompany death, it might not be a loud melody, but an impatient drop. For a very brief moment, there seemed to be a light somewhere. Not from the lamp, perhaps from memory. Arkhipov said softly, almost as a command, almost as a lullaby, "Lie down. Save. Wait." He leaned back, his eyes open, but deep inside he was already walking along another path, where younger, drier men were walking back towards him. On deck, the rain had stopped. The sky opened up a cruel pale blue. A bird flew by, calling briefly. The sea was calm, as if it had never been so violent. Kuznetsov took off his gloves. His hands were wrinkled. The water-soaked fingerprints looked like maps of some unvisited place. A colleague lit a cigarette for him. He shook his head. "Shall we go down again?" the other asked. "Down," he said. But the word down now sounded more like another word. "Continue." Lavrov entered the room and signed another paper. No one asked what it was. Paperwork was a way for people to let their hands do something when their minds couldn't find the answers. That night, on shore, Anna wrote the conclusion to the longest piece of her life. Kursk sank twice. The first time in the sea, the second time in silence. She dipped her pen. The ink spread a little on the paper, a small black line that faded like smoke. Act 3, Salvage and Aftershocks. Chapter 10, Rising from the Sea. Autumn 2001. The sky was gray on the surface of the Barents Sea. Flocks of birds circled in large circles, like invisible sentinels. On the deck of the giant Dutch ship, steel cranes towered like an artificial forest, cables taut and screeching. Their mission: to lift the Kursk from the depths, where it had lain like a black tomb for more than a year. Water poured down as the giant steel hull slowly rose. The sea shook, white foam rising thickly. A pungent smell rose, the smell of oil, burning smoke, and decomposition. Red rust and black ash spread out in patches. One officer bent over, his hand covering his mouth. Another pulled off his mask, his eyes moist. In the humid, salty air, the smell of old smoke still clung to the steel, as if it had become part of the metal. In the shattered compartment, the spotlights flickered. The walls were mottled with burn marks. A small nylon-covered notebook remained, the corners scorched, the words faint but still legible. "If you can read this, it means I'm not coming back. Teach your child to remember that his father loved the sea, but the sea took it away." Some stood still, not speaking. Some tapped their pens against their helmets, tapping slowly, as if responding to a distant echo. Chapter 11. Investigation and Denial. In Moscow, in the closed conference room, the neon light made every face pale. On the table was a thick stack of reports. The officials sat upright as if in court, but no one was the defendant. One person read, his voice monotonous. Official cause: experimental torpedo leaked oxygen, exploded. No evidence of collision with foreign ships, no signs of attack. There was a heavy silence. Petrov, the torpedo engineer, sat at the end of the table. He held a ballpoint pen, turning it over and over in his hand. Finally, he looked up, his eyes red as if he had never slept. "Steel remembers longer than people," he said hoarsely. "Let the dead speak." No one answered. Papers rustled. The truth was like a fish with all the bones removed, leaving only dried meat. In the press room, the flashlights flashed continuously. Lavrov stepped out, his shoulders straight, walking slowly. Reporters chattered. "There was a distress signal. Why didn't you accept the rescue early?" "There are rumors of a collision with a NATO ship. Do you deny it?" Lavrov stood still for a long moment, his eyes unblinking. Then he said simply, "This is a tragedy. No further comment." He turned away, leaving behind a sea of microphones that blared in vain. Outside in the hallway, he paused, his hand shaking as he lit a cigarette. The light flickered, the smoke billowing. He inhaled deeply, but in his chest, all he felt was cold air. Chapter 12. Funeral and Coda, National Day of Mourning. The sky was cloudy, the sea wind howling through the military cemetery. The rows of zinc coffins draped with Russian flags stood in a straight line, like a silent formation. The mournful music was deep and sad, drawn out like the breath of an exhausted animal. Irina Averina wore a black dress, hugging her little daughter tightly. The child fell asleep on her mother's shoulder, her hand still clutching a rag doll. An officer handed Irina a letter wrapped in nylon, found in compartment 9. She opened it with trembling hands. The words were blurred, but still legible. Irina, I love you. The sea keeps what it wants to keep. Kiss your child for me. Tears welled up, but her lips curved into a smile both painful and proud. The coffin was lowered, the sand and dirt falling. Each sound sounded like a nail hammering into the hearts of those left behind. In the distance, Anna stood still, writing the last sentence in her notebook. Kursk did not sink once. It sank twice, once in the sea, the second time in silence. The Barents Sea at dusk. The water was calm, gray, and unwrinkled. A small object floated on it. Kolya's pocket watch, the hand stuck forever at 11:28. A seagull flew by, making a short cry. The sound echoed, mingled with the wind, and then faded away.